two pieces so far. There may be more pieces before I'm done, but the first piece is the real self is not something to be searched for. The more you search, the more you become like that cat chasing its tail, or the dog chasing its tail, whichever it is that chases its tail in a circle. You're like this. Because that which searches is the mind. The mind only understands distinctions. I can only search for something I don't already have. I mean, we all know the joke of, you know, it's happened to most of us probably, having our glasses on our head and we're searching around for where are my glasses. Well, it's funny and it's a joke because I already had it. If you could legitimately search for something you already had, it wouldn't be a joke. And so the mind only understands distinctions. The minute you embark on a search for something, you're separate from it. You don't have it. And then the mind does what the mind knows how to do. And it's not the mind's fault. The mind is not bad. We're taught so frequently in the spiritual practice, you know, as though the mind were our worst enemy. It's not. The mind is only a vehicle. If I see violence, and I'm seeing, or let's say I'm watching TV and it's a show of horrible violence and profanity and nudity and all of these things, I don't say to myself, God, you stupid eyes, like I can never depend on you. God, what are my eyes doing? The eyes are just a vehicle. A vehicle for that which I've turned on to come into my understanding of perception and sensation. The eyes are not actually creating anything. And in the same way, what the mind is doing, it's doing based on what we're giving to it. If you're listening to horrible music and it's creating this yucky feeling inside of you, well, it's not your ears' fault. The ears are just transmitting what you're feeding them. So the mind is actually just a vehicle through which, you could say, consciousness or perception, or I don't want to get too semantic right now, but through which we have the experience. The problem, though, is, and this is why we tend to belittle the mind and talk about pushing the mind away, is the mind can only function when it's looking at something from outside. And this is why these Zen koans, for example, that, you know, the Zen Buddhist masters give for meditation. Well, why in the world would thinking about what's the sound of one hand clapping give you enlightenment? Like, it doesn't make any logical sense. The theory behind it is when the mind can no longer do the only thing the mind knows how to do, it stops. And when it stops, that's when you have the possibility to have the experience of what is beyond the mind. And I say this to you because when you frame a question and you frame your thought and you tell yourself, I'm searching for my true self, this is the mind and it's going on a treasure hunt and it has a clue, whether it's from a book or whether it's from a spiritual teacher or whether it's from something that we've heard. And the mind is going out now in search of something. And the problem with that is that your true self is already with you. But in order for the mind to search for it, you have to separate from it. So the first piece is stop thinking you're searching for anything and start thinking in terms of uncovering, allowing, being. And it becomes like what we were talking about last night in terms of taking off the clothes to get into the bath. That experience in the bath is, we'll call it, for this analogy, the experience of being with the true self. It's not that you have to go out in search of relaxation in a bathtub. But with all of the clothes on, you can't experience it. And so when the mind is doing its thing, and naming and categorizing and analyzing and judging and framing from a distance, it's the equivalent of having the clothes on. And so what you need to do first is simply understand that it's already there, so that the nature of what you're calling the search changes. And it becomes much more, how can I just sit here in this state and stop the mind from telling me that I need all of these other things, which actually are what's keeping me from being with my true self. And then, in terms of the fear, the palpitations and this that comes as you get closer, this goes back to the concept of the ego and the ego's insidiousness. It doesn't want to not play the leading role in the drama of your life. But when you experience the true self, there's no role left for the ego. The ego feeds itself on insecurity, on lack, on scarcity, on the fact that you need to do, achieve, attain, become. And then the ego sets out how we're going to do these things, and it compares us to others. How do we compare ourselves with those who are also doing and achieving and attaining and becoming? And compared to some, we're better, some we're worse, but there's always a place to go. And so as you start to get close, that fear is the ego's fear of death. And this is why, actually, so commonly when people start to go deep on a spiritual path, you actually start to hear a lot about visions of dying or nightmares of dying or all of these things that tends to surround death. And people will come and say, I don't know, somehow out of the blue, I feel like something's going to happen to me. I'm having these premonitions. And it's not actually death of the body. The body is still healthy and fine, but there's something inside that knows it's dying, and it's coming out through the subconscious in this fear and this grasping. And however old we are, whether it's 5 or 15 or 50 or 85, our entire identity has been based on the ego. And so although it sounds really pretty to slip into this bath, it's not quite as simple as the analogy would make it sound. Because how we identify as ourselves is so wrapped up with the ego that when we start to separate from the ego, it actually starts to feel like we're pulling some of ourself. And that's where the fear comes. And lastly, that's where the role of faith is. That, okay, I don't know who I'm going to be. or who I am if I'm not a victim of this, the doer of that, this role, this identity, that identity, the one who was abused, the one who was betrayed, the one who was always successful, the ugliest one, the most beautiful one, whatever. I don't know who I'm gonna be when I'm not that. And that's the ego's fear. But if you can just have faith that who you are is so much more beautiful and so much more perfect and so whole and so complete, that it's a safe place to go, that you're not going to disintegrate. And let yourself go to that safe place. And then the trembling will stop.